Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Greg. I'm a small business advocate with the Office of Small Business Assistance. If you're not familiar with us or what we do, then I'll give you kind of a brief idea of it now. The Office of Small Business Assistance is housed in the Secretary of State's Corporation Division. And I usually break our responsibilities or our duties down into three different categories. Even instead of responsibilities or duties, you might call them services. But probably the thing we do more than any other is serve as a place where we can provide information or refer people to a better resource for any question they have about starting, running, or closing down a business in the state of Oregon. Obviously, that's very broad. And so we provide high-level basic information on licensing requirements, certification requirements, registration requirements, things like that. And then we try to hand people off or direct them to whatever agency actually administers the requirements for what they're wanting to do, if there are any. We also help people as they are, if they have a small business at least, as they are interfacing or communicating with state and local government agencies. And I said small business, we define small as 100 employees or fewer. So if somebody is trying to communicate with a state agency and maybe they don't even know what agency to look to, or maybe they're not able to get a hold of somebody, or they're getting different conflicting answers, whether it's from the same person or from different people, we can help them to navigate that process. And oftentimes we end up working as sort of translators also. And then in an extreme enough circumstance, if a small business or small business owner they feel at least that they're being treated particularly poorly by a state agency, and they don't really have an avenue through which they can try to address whatever their grievance is, then they can complain to us, and we can open an investigation. If we are able to substantiate whatever their complaint is, we can draft a report and we can make recommendations back to that state agency on what they can do to address this kind of issue, reduce it in the future, mitigate it, things like that. Today's presentation specifically is going to be about end of year obligations. I've just kind of broken this into very broad, very general categories here. The reality is something like this, not knowing who's in the audience, and this not being a direct personal conversation, there's no way to really tailor this to any one business or any one person's needs. So as we go through these, it's going to have to, by necessity, stay very general. It's a very high level. It's a lot of bullet points, and really each bullet point, not just on this page, but as we get down to the subsequent pages, could be its own presentation. You can also think of this, or almost think of it as kind of like a heads up, right? So I'm going to tell you some of the things that apply to businesses in Oregon as one year ends or another year begins. And some of these will also be things that just happen on an annual basis, even though it may not be on a calendar year basis. And if it's something that you are not familiar with, or if it's something that you don't quite remember how it applies to your business, or maybe you don't quite remember if you've done this in past years, then it can serve as a jumping off point, and it can inform you going forward, whether you're going to go and learn about these things on your own, or whether you're going to reach out to my office, the Office of Small Business Assistance, to ask these questions, or maybe reach out to the agencies that actually administer these requirements. This is kind of a heads up as opposed to a deeply technical step-by-step kind of explanation. But anyways, as you can see on the categories here, we were going to talk about taxes. That's really kind of the elephant in the room, I think, for a lot of people when it comes to things that they need to start doing or preparing for at the end of the year. After that, we'll talk about licenses and registrations. That can be just as simple as registering with Secretary of State, or it could be professional licenses. And then good ideas as a bullet point. That's a very informal title, and I did that on purpose. My office, we're not CPAs, we're not attorneys, we're not business coaches in the normal sense. We're not someone who can tell you what you should or shouldn't do, or give you detailed steps on how to do things. But in the experience that I've had in this office, that the office had in general, we're going to go through some very high level suggestions on ways that you can approach your operations early in the year to lay a good groundwork to actually do these other things, these taxes or license regulations and registrations, making sure you're on top of them when you come up on the end of the year. Let's go ahead and we'll get right into it. So for taxes, we're going to touch on payroll taxes. That says personal property tax. Sorry, it should be business personal property tax and income taxes. I ordered them in this way because it's really probably the way we encounter them in the Office of Small Business Assistance. The vast majority of cases that we get as they relate to taxes are for payroll taxes or employer taxes. We really don't even get a lot of business personal property tax cases, but we've had a handful of them. And the income taxes, we get very few of those, and it's really a whole other animal by itself. Moving into the payroll taxes, I've got a list here of the different kinds of payroll tax, sorry, not the different kinds, but the different payroll tax returns that a business would have to, or at least may have to, file with the state of Oregon. Now, even though this is an end of year obligation presentation, I'm opening here with quarterly reports because it's the quarterly reports that sort of set the groundwork for the annual reports that you are going to be filing every year. So the OQ, if you're not familiar with it, the OQ is really the standard quarterly payroll tax return filed with the state of Oregon, where you are including information for your withholding tax, your unemployment insurance tax, something called a workers' benefit fund. There's a couple local transit district taxes that, depending on where your employees are doing their work, you may have to pay into those taxes. The statewide transit tax is a tax that's paid by employees who are residents of Oregon earning a wage. When you get to the end of the year, as you've been filing all of those quarterly reports, then when you get to where you're putting together your W-2s, then at January 31st of the following year, the Department of Revenue here in Oregon is going to require that you file what's called an ORWR. You're basically going to look at all of the W-2s you've issued to each of your individual employees, and you'll see how much is indicated on each of those W-2s for state withholding tax, total that up, and ideally, the total you get, if you say you have 3 employees, A, B, and C, the total for A, B, and C on their W-2s for the entire year will equal whatever it is that you've indicated on the total, all 4 of your quarterly OQs throughout the year. And this is for withholding tax. If it doesn't match, sometimes it doesn't, that just generally indicates an error on the OQs. So it tells you and it tells the Department of Revenue whether there's a credit for them to apply to you or pay back to you, or maybe whether you owe a little bit more withholding tax at that point. The next form here, the ORSTTA, it's a long name, but it's the same thing, but it's for the statewide transit tax. That's something that also has to be indicated on the W-2s, and they just want to make sure that whatever is on all of the W-2s as a whole reconciles with everything that you've reported quarterly throughout the year. iWire is the system that the state of Oregon uses for receiving employer or business return information for individual W-2s and the 1099s that they've issued as well. We used that example earlier of employee A, B, and C. So A, B, and C each get their own W-2, and you've included the general total information for that on your WR. You've included information on that earlier through the year on your quarterlies. And this is a way of Department of Revenue making sure that everything is continuing to line up. And then also when those individual employees file their individual tax returns and they attach their W-2s or include their W-2s with their income tax returns, all of these things can be cross-checked against each other and make sure that everything matches and no one at some point is fudging the numbers and trying to basically get a refund maybe that they aren't supposed to get, or not pay tax that they are supposed to pay. The OA is for, you can see the text here, is annual payroll report for domestic employers. Domestic employer is somebody who works in a household, a really really good and probably the most common example of that would be something like a nanny. So if you have a nanny who's working in your home, it's different from a regular employee, and there's a different set of payroll tax requirements and subjectivities for that, so they get a different return. This is an example of where we could have a whole other presentation on just this one bullet point. So without diving deep into how it's all different, a domestic employee from a regular employee, just know if you have a domestic employee and these taxes apply, you would be filing an annual return. It's called the OA. And then another one is the WA. So if you have an agricultural business, there's a seasonal element to most agricultural businesses. So the reporting and tax requirements there are also different from other types of employers. And they report their withholding annually on this WA form. The ORWR is filed, it used to be filed on paper. It's now only filed electronically, very similar to what we see down here for iWire, the W-2s and 1099s. If you're watching this after the fact, you can pause the presentation here. And I had considered putting together an actual resource slide at the end with links out to a bunch of different things, but it became way too long and unwieldy. I would strongly suggest that you can pause it here. You can go back and pause it on this part later, but search for each of these individually, and you can do it very, very easily. Any major search engine will work for this, but you can do a search for something like Oregon OQ or Oregon Form OQ, Oregon Statewide Transit Tax, Oregon Form ORWR. And you can find an actual fair amount of information on each of these on the Department of Revenue website. You can see the forms. The OQ is a little bit harder to find the actual form itself, but statewide transit tax, you can find the form in Department of Revenue's Forms and Publications Library. WR doesn't exist on paper anymore, but you can find the method of filing on their system called Revenue Online. And familiarize yourself with at least the way these forms look and the kind of information that's required for them, because as you come up on the time that you need to actually file this information, you can make sure, having seen the form, that you're organizing your information throughout the year in a way that will make the reporting at the annual level that much more efficient and easier and effective. We'll talk a little bit about that again later. These are the federal reports for payroll taxes, and we don't, in our office, we don't really help with federal issues. We can't. So if you're having an issue with the IRS or a lot of detailed questions around federal tax forms, this isn't really something we can help you with, but it really felt necessary to include it. It was a major hole in the presentation, an obvious place for people to at least have questions about. If you needed to at least familiarize yourself with your federal payroll tax reports, the federal quarterly report is the 941, but it doesn't include federal unemployment tax, right? So the federal unemployment tax is only filed annually on this form, the 940. And if you're in a especially small employer, so you have a very small annual liability, or everything is it's $1,000 or less, then you file instead with this 944. You would do that in place of the 941. Business personal property tax. This is one that we don't get this nearly as often as we get the payroll tax kind of questions, but it's definitely something that can cause significant issues. And it's really something that's useful for us to highlight because so few people really even know about it. If you were to actually speak with county, because this is reported and dealt with at the county level, if you speak with county staff about this, and they'll tell you that this is something that the compliance level really is very low, and we want to make sure we get the word out and people become more aware of this. So business personal property tax, as I said earlier, it's handled at county level. Every county has a county assessor who you'd be reporting to, and this tax is on tangible business personal property. We have some explanations here of the sorts of things that it includes, but it's basically equipment, so machinery, furniture. It doesn't matter whether it's being used currently or not, so it could be obviously in storage or held for sale, but any business personal property that's tangible and is in a county at 1 a.m. on January 1st of a given year is taxable for that year. And I have a bullet here that says there's a threshold for the tax. I purposely left the dollar amount of that threshold out because it's subject to change. If I'll use an arbitrary and purposefully low number, right? Let's just say we'll pretend it's $1,000. What this means is that if your business personal property is that tangible business personal property is assessed at a value less than $1,000, then there's no tax. If it's above that, then there would be tax for it. Again, that $1,000 is purposefully I've made that much lower than the actual threshold, and I don't include the real threshold because it can change. Whether you are above or below that threshold, the form still needs to be filed. You still need to be reporting it, and that would be reported on this form here, the ORCPPR. If you have real specific questions about business personal property, if it's not something that you filed before, then the best place to direct those questions would be to your county tax assessor. Obviously, there's many counties in Oregon, but I'm in Marion County. So I would go to the Marion County tax assessor, or I could even just do a search for Marion County business personal property tax. It's pretty easy to find information on it. There's also a page on the Department of Revenue's website. You can do a search for Oregon business personal property tax, and you can find it pretty easily there. The text that I have here in terms of what is taxable personal property, I pulled that right off the actual form itself. It's common for people not to even know that they're maybe subject to it, they need to report it. Okay, now for income tax, I've deliberately left this really without any detail, and I've referenced the federal forms as opposed to state forms because, one, we really don't deal with a lot of questions around income tax in our office, and two, I wanted to talk about these from a perspective of how to organize and keep your records and your information. Even if you have somebody else who's doing your taxes for you, you have to still be able to bring that person the necessary information and details to do those taxes. And it's not really in your best interest to be the person who shows up with just the box full of documents. There's a lot of people who do that, and I understand why. But if you spend some time and look at the actual returns here, so just obviously for instance, the sole proprietorship, Schedule C, profit or loss from business. The Schedule C has on it the actual information that it requires, and it's broken out into different categories, but you can use that form as a way of informing yourself from kind of this top-down perspective on how you should be keeping your records. So when you come up to the end of the year, and it's time to start getting ready for taxes being prepared and filed the next year, you can make sure that the information you have is the information you need and is organized in a way that will make that process as efficient and easy and painless and accurate as you need it to be. If you come up with a filing system or a record keeping system that is intuitive to you, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the most useful when it comes time to start preparing these returns or handing that information off to somebody else. So reviewing the Schedule C if you're a sole proprietor, the 1065 if you're part of a partnership, these corporate returns, the 1120 or the 1120S, these are ways that you can understand what it is that you're subject to, even if you don't have to know all of the individual details because you have someone else who's doing it for you. You want to make sure that you're aware of how this information has to be presented, and also at the end of the day, if you ask anybody who's with the taxing agencies, whether it's Department of Revenue for the state or the IRS for the feds, it's the business owner who is ultimately responsible for making sure that the information reported or the payments made are correct. Familiarizing yourself with these at a high level is probably a good first step, or at least early step, in making sure that you are prepared for all of this and you avoid the potential downfalls or pitfalls of making errors when you start reporting next year. Okay, so for licenses and registrations, since the Office of Small Business Assistance is located in the Secretary of State's Corporation Division, obviously this is something that we see and deal with often. Not every business has to do these at the end of the year. but we find that a lot of businesses choose to schedule their business registrations and then of course their renewals in the future with the calendar year or near to it. So assumed business names, people who are using one, those are due to be renewed every 2 years. Limited liability company or LLCs, corporations, those are renewed every year. Most often these are done online, which is why I didn't include a specific form or paperwork that would be used to do it, because if you go to the Secretary of State website and you go to renew a business, you follow those options, then you end up doing it online. That's the quickest way to do it. It's the easiest way to do it. And that's the way that we generally suggest people do it. Now, for similar but different, we have the city business licenses. Now, if someone is scheduling their entity renewals or their assumed business name renewals on a calendar year basis, then there's a good likelihood they'll be doing their city business licenses on the same kind of schedule. Now, city business licenses, whether they actually have to be done every year is going to vary from city to city, because city business licenses, whether they're required at all, will vary from one city to the next. There are, I know I've come across a few that have been actually on a calendar year, regardless of when somebody has done their actual registration for it, but these are often done on an annual basis. So as you come up on the end of the year, when you are doing your business renewal for your entity or for your business name, and when you're getting things together for your taxes, whether it's your income tax or your business personal property tax or your payroll tax, this is one more thing to make sure you have on your checklist. If you don't even know whether your city requires a business license, then you can call us and you can ask, or you can reach out to the city directly and you can ask them. And not every city actually requires them, but it's important to make sure that you work this into your process, because if it is a requirement, like anything else, you want to make sure that you're not lapsing on that. And then the professional licenses here, I've listed a number of them. This is definitely not all of them. It's not an all comprehensive list, but construction contracting, landscape contracting, architects, engineers, those are all generally 2-year professional licenses. And even though it's obviously critical for people to have these in order to do that kind of work, the reality is that a lot of times you could say that running a business can get in the way of running a business. So if you have a construction contracting company, your CCB license is critical to your work, but there are so many other elements that go into running something like a construction contracting business or a landscape contracting business that it's certainly possible for renewing that professional license, that CCB license or LCB license, to get sort of lost in the shuffle. And I speak to business owners on a regular basis who are dealing with these licensing boards or agencies because their license lapsed. So another thing to make sure you have on your checklist there is just checking in with your CCB license, your LCB license, if that's something that you have. The trades that I have down there, that would include things like plumbing work, or if you're an electrician, those things you're licensed through the building codes division. Those are every 3 years. The labor contractors, that would be something like construction contracting labor, or there's what's called a PSC, Property Services Contracting license through the Bureau of Labor and Industry. Those are every year. So these are not even all on the same schedule. Make sure as you come up on the end of the year, or if you have maybe a seasonal schedule to what you're doing, if you're scheduling a lot of your business processes around that seasonal schedule, and as you come into your next season, make sure that this is on your checklist. Make sure that you're checking in and making sure that you are renewing that license in a timely manner. Okay, so good ideas. And this is the one that it's very general. I don't know what your business does exactly. I don't know what your business needs are exactly. I don't know what tools or systems you have in place, but I'm kind of gearing this towards people who either don't have a business yet or they're very new to business. And so they're even just trying to get a sense of what that landscape is going to look like for them. So as I've sort of said, as we've been going through the presentation, you want to make sure you have a solid record keeping system. That's something that seems so basic and so obvious, right? But it really can't be overstated. If you don't have a good way of keeping records, then when it gets time to report something, when it gets time to pay something, it's harder to be accurate, and it's harder to remember to even do it in the first place. One of the real benefits to a lot of the different software options, and I can't name any particular options, but one of the real upsides to them is that they build the record keeping system directly into them. It's a necessary part of their actual functioning. Just the information you have to put into some kind of bookkeeping software is such that it's really just maintaining a database of everything you've been doing throughout the year. I've sort of referenced earlier as having checklists, right? I ran a small business myself in a past life, and I learned the hard way that I really needed to have a checklist for all kinds of things, almost everything, big or small, whether I was going to actually have that checklist with me as I went through some sort of project or task. I didn't always, but the act of sitting down and creating the checklist to begin with made me focus my thoughts and sort of organize everything externally in a way that the normal sort of organic process in the human brain may not do very well. So externalizing that and making sure that you're holding yourself accountable with that checklist is a great way of making sure that you complete all of those things that we've listed above in the presentation, and making sure that if each of those even has a checklist, that you're doing it correctly and appropriately, that you're sticking with that record keeping system, that you're following it. And then I've separated out from that other sort of more general things. So if you not everybody even has a business plan anymore, but if you have a business plan, as you come up on the end of the year, this is a perfect time to start reviewing your business plan and looking at what it is you've done versus where it is you want to be in your plan. This next one, look at your numbers, is really closely tied to that. So looking at your numbers, that's very vague because the numbers could be a lot of different things. It could be looking at your sales. It could be looking at your specific accounts that you may be trying to move up in a certain direction. It could be looking at the number of clients you have. There's any sort of numbers that you could be using to quantify different business processes, but this is where you have an opportunity to actually review those and run reports on those and make sure that things are moving in the direction you want. And if they're not, then you start to plan on how you can get it to go the way you do want it to. And as far as employee reviews, this could be an annual performance review. It could be an opportunity to sit down and check in with everybody who's on your team and make sure that they're getting what they need, that you're getting what you need, and that you're really fulfilling your different responsibilities as an employer. And technology, again, is also very vague because that could be reviewing your website. That could be looking at the actual hardware that you're using. It could be making sure that you're backing up your hard drives and your internet drives. Making sure that you're staying current with the technology side of things is an important part of your annual process as well. A lot of businesses start to really slow down this time of year, if you're not in something like retail at least. And so this is a time where you can really start to look more inward at your business and review these different things that need to be reviewed and updated or moved forward. As far as like resources, I have three of our primary or our better service providers who we tend to refer people out to. I've put these here as the resources because so much of what we've talked about in this is the things that really could be gone into so much detail, and the stakes can be high enough, particularly on the taxes and things like that, that it really does sort of serve your best interest to make sure that you have a good understanding of how these things work. But it's not something that an office like ours can provide a real technical education on, but these folks can. So the Small Business Development Centers, or the SBDCs, for instance, you can find them online at OregonSBDC.org. They're housed in community colleges around the state, and they're really there to provide small business management and administrative classes and education. So, I mean, it can be anything from marketing to bookkeeping to spreadsheeting. It can be specific things like internet marketing or QuickBooks. Every SBDC is a little bit different, and they're run by business experts in their communities. They're really trying to build their classes and the things they're offering around what people specifically need in those communities. Livelihood Northwest is an excellent program as well. It's a business development program. They do some education, but they also do other things. They used to be part of Portland State, and they're now their own separate organization. I would highly encourage people up in that area at least to check them out. And score.org is where you can go to find a business mentor, somebody who can actually have a one-on-one relationship with you and guide you through the processes of starting or growing your business. And certainly a lot of the things that we've talked about above is going to play into the kinds of experience they have. Excellent resources, all of them. I strongly encourage you to check them out. Now here, this is the actual team in the Office of Small Business Assistance. So Trevor Leahy is our manager. He's the actual small business ombudsman right now. I'm Greg McAllister. Matthew Tenney is one of our other advocates. Bob is usually the individual who you will speak with first if you call us at this toll-free number, this 844 number. He does a great job of taking everybody's information and making sure that we have a clear understanding of what that person's needs are. And that way, when the case gets on to Trevor or myself or Matthew, we're able to move ahead in the most efficient way possible. And then the different ways you can reach out to us are over here on the right. So this Need Help button, you can find this on the homepage of many, if not most, executive branch agencies in Oregon, because those are the ones who we would actually be able to look into or investigate. The toll-free number there is the way you reach us by phone, or business.sos@oregon.gov is our email address. And of course, we have a website at this oregon.gov/smallbusiness. So I hope this was helpful for you. I hope you're able to learn something. If you have any specific questions about the stuff that was in this presentation, or if you want to find other ways of accessing maybe more specific resources on the various web pages for state agencies like Department of Revenue, feel free to reach out to us. We can send you a document that will have actual web addresses there. Otherwise, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.